Elite scientist called it impossible, then a simple woman calmly rewrote the theory in front of him. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, back to Samantha Miller. She stood quietly near the back of the lecture hall, a place she had chosen on purpose, not because she lacked confidence, but because she had learned long ago how much freedom came with being underestimated. Samantha Miller didn't look like someone who would change the course of modern science. She wore a plain cardigan, sensible shoes, and carried a worn notebook instead of a tablet. To the casual observer, she blended in with the graduate assistants and visiting observers who filled the room whenever a famous mind took the stage. And today, that mind belonged to Dr. Richard Evans. Dr. Evans was everything the scientific world admired. Ivy League credentials, best-selling books, keynote invitations that paid more than most people earned in a month. His presence commanded attention before he even spoke. When he adjusted the microphone and cleared his throat, the room fell into a practiced silence. He was here to present what many called his life's work, a theoretical framework that promised to solve a decades-old problem in applied physics. Or at least, that was the promise. As he walked through equations projected across a massive screen, his confidence never wavered. Each symbol, each assumption, delivered with the certainty of a man used to being right. Then, halfway through, he stopped. He turned slightly, hands resting on the podium, and smiled in a way that suggested finality. He told the audience that beyond this point, the problem became unsolvable. That the limitations were fundamental. That no revision, no alternative approach, no outside perspective could change that conclusion. He called it impossible. A few people nodded. Others scribbled notes, already preparing to cite his words. Samantha did neither. She simply looked at the screen, her expression calm, almost curious. What no one in that room knew was that Samantha had encountered this problem years earlier, not in a prestigious lab, but at a small kitchen table, working late after long days spent far from academic spotlights. She had followed the same trail Dr. Evans now presented, and she had seen the same wall. But she had also seen something else. A quiet inconsistency. A place where certainty had been chosen over questioning. As Dr. Evans continued, dismissing the possibility of alternative interpretations with a light chuckle, Samantha slowly closed her notebook. She wasn't offended. She wasn't angry. She was something far more dangerous to unchecked authority. She was certain. In that moment, while the room absorbed the weight of the word impossible, Samantha Miller prepared to do the one thing no one expected. And the man at the podium had no idea that the calm woman he hadn't noticed yet was about to rewrite everything he thought he knew. Samantha took a deep breath as she slowly stood from her seat. The room, filled with prominent scientists and researchers, was still humming with the quiet chatter of disbelief. Dr. Evans had just declared his theory impossible, and now, here she was, about to challenge it. As she moved towards the front of the room, the noise in the background faded away, and a calm focus settled over her. She had no intention of proving anyone wrong out of spite, but simply to reveal the truth that had been hidden in plain sight. Dr. Evans, still standing confidently behind the podium, had yet to notice the shift. His eyes scanned the room, his arrogance only growing as people whispered among themselves. He had already won in their eyes. Samantha reached the chalkboard, took the piece of chalk in her hand, and felt the weight of the moment settle in. There was no room for hesitation now. She glanced at the complex equations Dr. Evans had written on the board and then looked out at the audience. Every pair of eyes in the room was fixed on her now. Her heart beat steadily in her chest. This wasn't her first time solving a difficult problem, but it was the first time her solution would be seen by so many influential people. The chalk squeaked slightly as she began to write, the marks forming precise lines that connected the dots Dr. Evans had missed. The room remained eerily quiet. Each stroke of the chalk felt like it was carving away at the doubts that had formed around her. Dr. Evans finally seemed to notice, his gaze shifting to her as she worked. His confident smirk slowly faded as she continued, her movements methodical and sure. She wasn't rushing, but every line was deliberate, every number carefully placed. As she wrote, the equations began to make sense. Where Dr. Evans had seen limitations, Samantha saw an opening. It was almost as if the theory was waiting for someone to challenge its assumptions. The chalk continued to dance across the board, drawing out the solution that had been eluding Dr. Evans and everyone else in the room. The crowd grew quiet, a stillness hanging in the air as they watched her work. Samantha paused for a moment, stepping back from the board to assess what she had written. A small smile tugged at her lips. It was complete. The solution was elegant, simple even, and yet it had the potential to change everything. She turned to face the room, her voice steady as she spoke. The problem you all see as impossible, she said, is only impossible because you're working within the constraints of your assumptions. Let's expand those assumptions. Dr. Evans stood frozen, his expression one of confusion and disbelief. The audience remained silent, processing what had just happened. Samantha's calm demeanor was in stark contrast to the storm of emotions that had to be swirling within Dr. Evans. His reputation had just been shattered in front of the very people who had once regarded him as an untouchable genius. The silence lingered for a moment longer, before it was broken by a murmur from the crowd. Dr. Evans cleared his throat, trying to regain his composure, but his voice faltered as he began to speak. This can't be right, he stammered, his confidence shaken. Samantha looked at him, her gaze unwavering. It's right, she said simply, her words quiet but filled with certainty. The room was still, waiting for his next words. But Dr. Evans didn't have any. He was left speechless, unable to explain away what had just unfolded before him. Samantha stood calmly at the front of the room, her gaze never leaving Dr. Evans, who was still trying to wrap his mind around the equations she had just written. The silence in the room was deafening, a heavy weight pressing down on everyone's shoulders. The brilliance of what she had just done had left them all stunned. Samantha felt no rush, no urgency. She simply stood there, letting the impact of her work sink in. Dr. Evans, however, seemed to be unraveling before her eyes. He blinked several times, as if trying to understand what had happened. His eyes flicked from the board to Samantha and back again, disbelief spreading across his face. This is impossible, he muttered under his breath, but the words lacked conviction. It was more a reflex, a defense mechanism against the shattering of his carefully constructed world. Samantha didn't react. She didn't need to. The answer was already there, plain and simple. The room remained silent, the weight of the moment hanging in the air. She could feel the eyes of the audience on her, but she remained focused. She was no longer concerned with what others thought. She was here to show them what they had failed to see. After a long pause, Dr. Evans took a step forward, his posture stiff, trying to regain some semblance of authority. He adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat, and addressed the room, though his voice now trembled slightly. There must be some mistake. This approach is unorthodox. It's not how we do things in the field. His words felt hollow. The theory he had spent years refining, the one he had proudly displayed just moments ago, now stood in direct contrast to what Samantha had just presented. And no amount of pride or experience could hide that. Samantha, still composed, turned her attention back to the chalkboard. Science is about challenging what we know. Sometimes, the answers are hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone to question the assumptions. Her voice was steady, calm, but there was a quiet power in her words. Dr. Evans opened his mouth to argue, but his words faltered. The crowd watched, the tension in the room palpable. Samantha's calm confidence contrasted sharply with his growing frustration. He could feel his grip on the situation slipping. He had been the one to stand in front of the room, confident in his own brilliance, and now he was faced with the undeniable fact that a woman who had been dismissed, underestimated, and ignored had just rewritten the theory he had spent his life perfecting. He swallowed hard, trying to regain control. This doesn't make sense. He repeated, but it was less of a statement and more of a question. Samantha didn't need to say anything more. Her work spoke for itself. The solution she had provided wasn't just a correction, it was a breakthrough. And it was undeniable. The room was beginning to buzz with whispers. Some were skeptical, others amazed. But the reality was settling in. Dr. Evans had just been bested by the quiet woman no one had taken seriously. He stood there, helpless, as the realization sank in. Samantha Miller had just changed the course of their understanding, and there was nothing anyone could say to undo it. Samantha remained at the front of the room, her calm demeanor unwavering, as the whispers around her began to grow louder. The tension in the air was almost palpable, and she could feel the weight of every gaze fixed upon her. Dr. Evans, still standing near the podium, looked as though he was trying to piece together his shattered confidence. His earlier arrogance had been replaced with confusion, frustration, and a growing sense of vulnerability. He cleared his throat again, attempting to regain some control over the situation, but his voice was noticeably shaky. I need to review this in more detail, he muttered, his words barely audible over the murmurs in the room. Samantha didn't respond. She didn't need to. The truth of her work was already laid out before them all. Dr. Evans hesitated for a moment longer before finally stepping back, unable to deny the brilliance of her solution any longer. The audience, once skeptical, was now in awe of what they had just witnessed. Samantha could feel the weight of their collective attention, but it didn't faze her. She had done what she set out to do, prove that there was always more to discover, no matter how impossible it seemed. After a few long moments of silence, a voice from the back of the room spoke up. Could you explain how you arrived at this conclusion? It was a young researcher, a graduate student who had been quietly observing from the corner of the room. Samantha turned towards him, offering a small nod. She stepped forward, her eyes now scanning the equations on the board. She had already done the work, but now it was time to explain it. The key, she began, her voice steady and clear, is understanding that the assumptions we've all been working with are limiting. The theory Dr. Evans presented had its merits, but it was built on constraints that were never fully questioned. I simply approached it from a different angle, one that allowed for a broader interpretation of the data. As she spoke, the room fell into a deeper silence, everyone hanging on her every word. She continued, carefully explaining the steps she had taken to arrive at the solution. She didn't rush, knowing that this was her moment to demonstrate not only her intellectual ability but also her calm, methodical approach to problem solving. Dr. Evans, though still standing frozen, listened intently, his earlier resistance slowly giving way to reluctant admiration. It was clear now that Samantha had not only rewritten the theory, she had redefined the problem. The room was no longer filled with skepticism but with respect. For the first time in a long while, Dr. Evans found himself questioning his own approach, his own assumptions. He had built his career on the belief that certain boundaries in science were impenetrable, that certain theories were beyond challenge. But Samantha had proven that the impossible was only impossible until someone dared to look at it from a different perspective. When she finished explaining her approach, Samantha took a step back, allowing the audience to absorb what she had just shared. Dr. Evans, still standing at the front, finally broke his silence. I didn't see it that way, he admitted, his voice softer than before. Samantha simply nodded. That's the beauty of science, she replied. There's always more to learn, always more to question. With that, the room erupted into quiet applause. It wasn't loud or overwhelming, but it was sincere. Dr. Evans, once the unchallenged expert, had just been humbled. Samantha Miller, the quiet woman who had been underestimated by everyone in the room, had proven that brilliance doesn't need to shout to be heard. Samantha could feel the weight of the room shift as the applause, though brief, echoed in her mind. It wasn't just the approval from the others that she felt, it was the weight of something much deeper. Dr. Evans, standing at the front of the room, now appeared smaller. The great scientist who had once commanded attention and respect was now nothing more than a man who had been humbled by the very person he had dismissed. As the room quieted down, Samantha allowed herself a brief moment of relief. She had done it. She had shown them all that brilliance wasn't confined to the walls of a prestigious institution or the shiny accolades that decorated one's career. But as she stood there, poised and calm, she realized that this was just the beginning. The moment was hers, but the real work, the real change, was yet to come. Dr. Evans, who had been silent for what felt like an eternity, finally spoke up. His voice was no longer filled with the arrogant confidence that had marked his earlier presentation. Instead, it was quieter, more reflective. I have to admit, I didn't see it, he said, his words slow and deliberate. Samantha didn't respond right away. She simply nodded, understanding the weight of his admission. For years, he had been the one who others looked to for answers, the one who had been revered for his brilliance. And now, for the first time, he was the one learning. I've spent so much time looking at the problem from one angle, Dr. Evans continued, that I never thought to step back and look at it from a different perspective. You've shown me that. Samantha could see the struggle in his eyes. He wasn't just admitting that she was right, he was admitting that his entire approach had been flawed. This wasn't just about being wrong on a single theory. It was about the realization that his entire worldview had been limited by his own pride. It's not about being right, Samantha said softly, her voice steady and firm. It's about being willing to question everything, even the things we think we know for sure. Dr. Evans looked at her, his expression unreadable for a moment, before he spoke again. I think you're going to change the field, he said, his voice tinged with awe. Samantha smiled, but there was no arrogance in it. She wasn't interested in fame or recognition. She was interested in the work. In the truth. We all change the field, she replied simply. By continuing to ask questions, by continuing to challenge what we know, we all contribute. And that's how progress happens. With that, the room fell silent again. But this time, the silence was different. It wasn't filled with uncertainty or doubt. It was filled with a shared understanding, a collective recognition that something had shifted. As the final moments of the presentation came to a close, Samantha could feel a shift not only in Dr. Evans but in the entire room. They had all witnessed something extraordinary, not just a breakthrough in theory, but a breakthrough in perspective. And as she left the room that day, she knew that this moment would be remembered, not just for the scientific breakthrough, but for the quiet woman who had reminded them all that true genius isn't about proving others wrong, it's about showing the world what's possible when we open our minds to new possibilities. Samantha walked out of the lecture hall, her steps steady and sure. The sounds of quiet conversations and hurried footfalls echoed through the corridors, but she paid them no mind. The weight of the day's events still lingered in the air, and as she passed through the door, she felt a sense of peace settle within her. It wasn't the applause or the recognition that mattered to her. It was the knowledge that she had done what she came to do, she had shown them the truth. As she made her way down the hallway, she noticed a familiar face waiting by the exit. It was Dr. Evans. His usual composure had been replaced with an expression of genuine reflection. He stepped toward her as she approached. Samantha, he said, his voice quieter than before, I owe you an apology. Samantha paused, surprised by the sincerity in his tone. You don't owe me anything, she replied calmly. But I appreciate the gesture. Dr. Evans hesitated for a moment, then spoke again, his words measured. What you did today, it's rare. Most people would have just proven me wrong for the sake of it. But you didn't. You showed me that there's always more to discover, even when we think we've reached the end. Samantha smiled faintly, but there was no triumph in her expression. That's the thing about science, she said softly. It's never really about winning. It's about understanding. The moment we stop questioning, we stop moving forward. He nodded, his gaze thoughtful. I've spent so many years focused on my own theories, my own perspective, that I forgot what it was like to be a beginner, to approach a problem without assumptions. You've reminded me of that. Samantha's expression softened. We all start somewhere, she said. No one has all the answers. And sometimes, it takes someone else, someone with a different perspective, to show us the way forward. There was a long pause as they both stood in the quiet hallway, the hum of distant conversations the only sound. Dr. Evans broke the silence. You've changed my view of things, Samantha. I don't know how to thank you for that. Samantha shook her head. I didn't do it for thanks, she said simply. I did it because I believe in the work. I believe in the process of discovery. Dr. Evans looked at her, his expression now one of genuine respect. You've got a rare gift, Samantha. And I think the field of science will be better for it. She gave him a small nod, then turned to leave. Good luck, she said softly, walking away. As she stepped outside into the cool air, she felt a sense of accomplishment, but it wasn't a feeling of superiority. It was the quiet satisfaction that comes from knowing you've done something meaningful. And as she looked up at the sky, she knew that her journey was just beginning. There was so much more to explore, so much more to learn. And she was ready to dive back in, not for the recognition, but for the love of discovery that had driven her from the start. Samantha sat at her desk late that evening, the soft hum of her computer screen the only sound in the quiet room. The day's events had passed in a blur, but now that the adrenaline had worn off, she found herself reflecting on everything that had happened. Dr. Evans' admission, the recognition from her peers, and the quiet realization that her work had made a lasting impact. Yet, despite it all, Samantha didn't feel the sense of victory she expected. To her, it wasn't about proving a point, it was about the discovery. It was about the process, not the applause. She turned her attention back to the screen in front of her, where the equations from earlier still lingered in her mind. There was something about the theory that still fascinated her, something that didn't feel quite finished. Perhaps there was another layer to uncover, another breakthrough waiting just out of reach. She knew that if she didn't keep digging, the question would nag at her forever. So, she began typing, her fingers moving quickly over the keys as new ideas started to form. She wasn't sure where this new path would lead, but she was certain that she had to follow it. As the hours passed, the room grew darker, and the only light now came from the screen, where a new set of equations began to emerge. She was so engrossed in her work that she didn't notice the time slipping away. It wasn't until she heard a soft knock at the door that she looked up, blinking in surprise. Her colleague, Alex, stood in the doorway, his expression a mix of concern and curiosity. Samantha, he asked, stepping inside. It's past midnight. Are you still at it? Samantha smiled faintly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. I couldn't stop thinking about the theory, she said, her voice almost apologetic. I think there's more to it. I just need to work through it. Alex nodded, his eyes softening. I get it. But don't burn yourself out. You've already done something incredible today. Samantha's smile widened slightly, but she didn't respond. She wasn't sure how to explain it. She wasn't burning out, she was simply following the thread of curiosity that had always driven her. I'll take a break soon, she said, though her eyes returned to the screen as she spoke. Alex stood there for a moment, watching her, before he let out a quiet sigh. All right, he said, turning to leave. But if you need anything, I'm here. As the door closed behind him, Samantha sat in the silence of the room, her thoughts turning back to the work ahead. She knew that this was only the beginning. The breakthrough she had experienced today wasn't the end of her journey, it was just another step in a much longer path. And she was ready to keep going. The excitement of discovery, the thrill of finding something new, was enough to keep her moving forward. For Samantha, the work was never done, it was only just beginning. Samantha continued to work late into the night, her mind focused on the next step. The room was silent except for the faint sound of her typing, the only evidence of the storm of thoughts swirling in her head. She had already proven the impossible theory wrong, but there was still something in the back of her mind telling her that there was more to uncover. The theory was like a puzzle with a few missing pieces, and she wasn't going to rest until she found them. Her fingers moved swiftly across the keyboard as she entered new variables and adjusted her equations, each movement deliberate and purposeful. It wasn't until the early hours of the morning that she sat back, rubbing her tired eyes. She had reached a new conclusion, one that would challenge even the best minds in her field. The solution wasn't just a minor correction, it was an entire shift in perspective. She had redefined the framework Dr. Evans had spent years developing, and the implications were enormous. As she stared at the screen, Samantha couldn't help but feel a surge of excitement. She had done it. She had found a new way to think about the problem, and in doing so, she had opened the door to a new chapter of scientific discovery. But with that excitement came a sense of responsibility. What she had just uncovered wasn't just her personal achievement, it had the potential to change the course of the field. She had to get it right. The implications were too great to make any mistakes. As the first rays of light peeked through the window, Samantha decided it was time to take a break. She stepped away from her desk and stretched, feeling the tension leave her shoulders. For the first time in hours, she allowed herself a deep breath. She had been so consumed by her work that she hadn't noticed how much time had passed. She walked to the window and looked out, the quiet of the early morning a welcome contrast to the whirlwind in her mind. But as she stood there, looking at the world outside, she knew that this was just the beginning. She had found the missing pieces, but there was so much more to explore. The excitement she felt wasn't just about solving a problem, it was about the endless possibilities ahead. And she was ready to embrace them. She turned back to her desk, her mind clear and focused. She had work to do. This breakthrough was just the first step, and Samantha was determined to take it all the way. She sat back down, opened her notes, and began to refine her findings, knowing that she was about to embark on a journey that would take her far beyond the boundaries of what she had thought possible. Samantha sat back in her chair, feeling the weight of the past few days settle in. It had been a whirlwind of discovery, reflection, and growth. She had taken on a challenge that no one thought she could overcome, and not only had she succeeded, but she had done so in a way that would forever change the trajectory of her field. Yet, despite all of the recognition and praise, there was no sense of finality. She knew that the work she had done was only a small piece of a much larger puzzle. As she gazed at the equations on her screen, she realized how much more there was to explore. The possibilities were endless. In the quiet of her office, Samantha allowed herself a moment of peace. She had come a long way from the woman who had been dismissed as just another face in the crowd. Now, she was a trailblazer, a leader in her field, someone who had proven that greatness often comes from the most unexpected places. But that wasn't the end of her journey, it was just the beginning. As she looked out the window, she felt a sense of excitement bubble up inside her. There were so many unanswered questions, so many unknowns, and she was determined to find the answers. She had already changed the way people saw her, but now it was time to change the way they saw the world. The field of science was vast, and there was still so much to learn, so much to uncover. Samantha knew that her discovery would have far-reaching consequences, but it was the future, the unknown, that excited her the most. She didn't want to stop at this one breakthrough. She wanted to push further, dive deeper, and see just how far she could go. She was no longer content with simply solving problems, she was ready to create new ones, to challenge the very foundations of her field. Samantha took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her determination. She was ready. Ready to continue her journey, to see where her curiosity would take her next. The work had just begun, and she was prepared to face whatever challenges lay ahead. With a renewed sense of purpose, she turned back to her desk and opened her next project, eager to begin again. The world was waiting for her next discovery, and Samantha Miller was ready to lead the way.